We'll get started if we can. Thanks very much for coming along. I appreciate how busy everybody is. I know apparently you've got some, or some of you have got some dissertation deadlines to meet. So I feel for your situation, but thanks for taking up the time to come along, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. This is all for you. Please treat this as an interactive event. We're putting this on to try and help you build your career in the built environment or wherever you end up. Okay, so before we start, just a couple of quick introductions. Right, okay, so this is me. So I'm Ian Durbin. I'm a visiting professor for the IEDE course. I've been involved in this course for about 8 years, I guess. So just by way of an introduction to me, I'm very old. I started where you are back in 1983, graduated in 83, 84, rather it was. And I was lucky enough to do a course very similar to you, which is a joint architectural and engineering course, which stood me in good stead in my career. I retired about 5 years ago, and over that sort of 35 plus years, I think I've gathered a bit of wisdom. That doesn't mean I'm super intelligent, but I've just got a bit of learned behavior skill set that I've picked up over the 35 plus years in my career. And my world was very different from what your world will be when you graduate. It was a much slower pace. There was almost no mention of carbon when I joined Hoare Lea back in 1984. In fact, I was drawing with a drawing pen. It just goes to show how old I am. Your world, though, will be dominated by carbon, and the how you embrace that and that challenge will, I think, shape your career. And I'm pretty sure that it will be, if you can do that, you will have a hugely rewarding career ahead of you. So I set out to try and work out how the wisdom that I have in being an old timer like myself, how I could actually get any of that into your heads so that you are match fit, for want of a better phrase, as quickly as you can when you join your world of work. And it's not just my wisdom. There's a whole load of wisdom in the industry. People like me who've been around a little bit, who've got interesting stories to tell, and from a whole load of just backgrounds. So not just engineering or architects, but clients, quantity surveyors, planners, manufacturers, all those sort of things. So how can we bring that wisdom through to you? And that's what this course is, this series of talks is all about. It's monthly. Next month we've got a quantity surveyor, one of the best quantity surveyors I've ever worked with, who's coming along to talk about cost and money, all the very important things. And then we have a break for the summer, and then start again in October with a mixture of architects and engineers, which I'm still chatting about that as we speak. So this is about passing the wisdom that we have to you. And it's a totally interactive session, so we'd like you to stop and ask questions whenever you want, or wait until the end, where we've got hopefully a really long or a longish Q&A session to cover everything you have. But this is, as I say, this is all about you. We're here to help you. So then a quick introduction to Eimear. I've known Eimear for probably 25 years almost. She started with Hoare Lea as an MEP. Engineer, and then moved through sustainability and latterly into in-use optimization, which she'll talk about shortly. And Eimear is much younger than I am, so her grasp of carbon is much more relevant and much more current. So she's very carbon aware, and she has, I think, a massively deep understanding of how buildings work in use, and that's a very interesting area to cover. And I also think that Eimear is one of those small handful of people who is actually helping to change this industry for the better. So we're very lucky to have her here today. And she is leading the charge for Hoare Lea, amongst others, in decarbonising the existing building stock. And she also has significant wisdom to offer. So as I say, questions throughout, whenever you want. I'll be looking at if anybody raises their hand, or if you want to save them up, then we'll have some Q&A at the end. That's it. So I finished my bit. I'll pass over to Eimear.
Thank you.
You never had a round of applause before. Well done.
I'm privileged. Right. So thanks everybody for the time. Ian's asked me to talk a bit about my career in building services engineering, which is what it was called when I started. I think you're the built environment That's what we're going to talk about, a bit about my experience. One of the things when I was thinking about this presentation was to talk about kind of a realization that I've had fairly recently about this world and this career of engineering, in particular built environment engineering. And the realization I think I've come to, and it's a bit grandiose, but I think that engineers are, I'm going to let you fix that if you want to. I think engineers are best placed to run the world. And before you assume on that, on why that might be, it isn't about carbon. Well, it's not just about carbon. It's a little bit about carbon, but it's not just about carbon. Right, so I'm going to start explain my theory behind this. Every single one of you are here because you're smart, right? You're here because you have a certain level of academic intelligence. And the journey to becoming accepted on a course like this means that you've got to have that background in traditionally the hard subjects like maths and science, right? So we've all got that. And you're willing to work hard at those subjects. Like engineering courses are notoriously hard and long, long lectures and long hours. You know, none of these arts where they have 1 hour a week or whatever it is. You know, you've got to work hard, right? So, characteristic positive trait number 1 is that you guys are smart. And also a little side note, all the hard maths and stuff you're doing, there's probably only one equation you'll ever need in the real world. Portion's that. Don't tell your professor I ever said that, but that's the one that we use all the time. Yeah. So we're smart and we're not afraid of hard work. Characteristic number 1 of why we should be running the world. I would also argue that there's a reason we've chosen this career. So engineering is a choice. Is it the smart choice of the career, if you really think about it? I've met hundreds of engineers in my time, I would say. Some of them the smartest people in the world. Some of them might even be in this room. And they all chose this career above and beyond everything else because they wanted to make a difference and because they felt empowered to be able to make a difference. So I would argue that the vast majority of us have chosen this career to make a difference. It isn't the most financially lucrative career. I'm not saying that you're going to struggle. We don't struggle generally. But, you know, if money was your main driver, would you be doing this? Would you probably be doing finance instead? You know, same sort of skill set. You're good at math, you're good at numbers. But can you make much of a difference in the finance world? If we were to do, sometimes I think that engineers are maybe just like finance bros with morals. So, however, I think that's another characteristic trait of us engineers, that we've got morals, and that's really important. And another one that I've noticed as well is that we're always, all the engineers, myself included, are willing to learn from our mistake, and we're open to learning from our mistakes. And actually, I think openness is probably the wrong word. When you're a true engineer, it's more of a need, it's more of a desire, it's more of a hunger to learn from your mistakes. The best way we learn is by learning from our mistakes. And some of the most memorable times in my career has been those mistakes, which sound counterintuitive, but it's when things go wrong that you learn the best. So I'm going to take you through a couple of my favorite mistakes. One of them is my own, and one of them is an architect's. They're both quite fun. So this is the Earth Sciences building. Ian's going to be familiar with all these projects anyway. So this is a lab building in Oxford University that was designed by Hoare Lea. And in this building, they do what they call earth sciences. I think it's to do with plants, stuff like that. Growing things, nature, yeah. I can't remember, it was a while ago.
Geology.
Geology and yeah, things to do with the earth. Rocks. And this is inside of that building. This is when we were designing the building, it was very much the start of the proper true building performance optimization. We want to get that building as efficient as possible. So we wanted that. The desire from the client was a 24-hour building, so everything on all the time in case they wanted to do a last-minute experiment at midnight or something. But we was like, well, that's going to use up so much energy, so let's just figure a way that it doesn't have to be like that. And so we said we'd install some switches in the room so that if you're using this room after hours, you just press this switch. And in our naivety, this is the switch that we chose to put in. So if you're sitting there working on geology and plants and other things like that, that's not going to mean anything to you. Yeah, they all thought this button that we put in the wall was for something to do with their experiments, nothing to do with the ventilation. And so, you know, that was a huge lesson for us to say, people that understand your users, don't think like an engineer, really. The engineer goes out the window. And it wasn't just engineers on this building that I would say made a mistake. Potentially the architects did too. And I know this is quite an interesting one for me because I quite like people, I quite like psychology, and I quite like buildings and architecture. And the theory that I was driven by the client for this building was collaboration. They wanted the incidental conversations of the lab users in the corridors to come up with new ideas and experiments, and they wanted them to collaborate. So they created lots of these like open places in between the write-up areas. So these are write-up areas, there's labs, the breakout spaces where they could bump into each other and invent something amazing. And this was open plan here as well. What they failed to realize and to understand is that a lot of people that work in those environments like quiet. They like to be in their own headspace. They need quiet thinking space, thinking time as well. And so in these breakout spaces, all this row of breakout spaces, signs started to appear. Like that. And so that whole plan of this is going to be the collaboration space within, you know, with one poster, it's gone. However, we did learn, and the architects learned, and I learned, and you know, it's one of the stories that I will never forget from my career. So that goes to our little tick box of our characteristics of engineering. We learn from our mistakes, definitely. And when you do make those mistakes, that's when the curiosity kicks in. Like, why did that happen? How did that happen? And you're coming from a course of engineering, which is like a binary sort of thing. I don't know if it's true for you guys, but I found when you're studying engineering, it's right or it's wrong. It's maths, it's 1 or it's 0. You know, it's black and white. And it took me a long time to figure out that actually that's not quite true in the real world. It's as much an art as it is a science. Every engineer has their own style. And how I design a building is actually different than how Ian designed a building. And that's okay. You've got to understand what your style is and go with it and trust it and believe in it. And I'm going to do an example of how very early on in the career I figured out what Ian's style was. Is ringing a bell?
Certainly is.
This is one of the first projects I worked in after I joined the firm with Ian. And so this is the Queen's College, another one in Oxford, and I don't know if you can see it from there, but effectively there's these two listed walls here. And the idea was to put a hat on them and build like a lecture theatre in the middle. It's beautiful, quite nice. But the architect described this as not a building, but a large piece of furniture, right? So that's where we're coming from. That was the sort of ethos with it. And Ian's style of engineering is, you're a sketcher, Ian, I would say. He's an architect. I think I've described you as an architect wrapped in an engineer's shirt. He loves getting his pen out, blank piece of paper, always doing that. And him and his not at all ego-driven architect. God, I sat in the room once, a blank piece of paper and some pens. And at the end of that meeting, Ian just gives me this and goes, there you go, that's your plant room. Remember this? That's your plant room, Eimear. Fit the stuff in there. Now I had to fit in ventilation for 100 people, fresh air ventilation for 100 people. And you can see the plant room in that drawing. Going to tell them where it is? That bit at the top, that little triangle. That's what Ian gave me. The first, it was teeny tiny, the first and only ever triangle shaped plant room I've had to deal with. And it was
Character building.
It was definitely, I was still talking about it years later. It was, so I think our solution, my solution, taking ownership, was to put 2 units in. And I mean, that it was convoluted, but you know what, it was what it was. These are listed walls. We actually had nothing. It was a large piece of furniture, and we did it, and we managed to figure it out. And that was where the creative side of engineering comes in. You know, that isn't something that you're going to learn by studying and by doing exams. Obviously, do those things, really important. But, you know, be prepared to come across things that you won't find in a book, and enjoy it as well. And that creativity also then leads on with the continuous questioning of another set of skills that I never expected to need. And this one, as an example project of where I learned this skill, was this building in New Street Square in the city. I don't know if anybody is familiar with this building, but it was built as a excuse me, as a shell and core. So the shell of the building was built first, with just the floors, and waiting for a tenant to come in. Deloitte came along and said, we'd like to take over the whole building. We'll fit it out. So the company, Hoare Lea, was brought on board, excuse me, to get involved in the fit out of the project. So the base build was there, the base ventilation was there. It was just the final bits on the floor that were needed. I work in existing buildings post completion, so this wasn't normally a project I would be involved in. However, there was an issue with the maintenance team of the base build who were on site and the fit out team. And the fit out team couldn't commission it because there wasn't enough air. I'm not going to go into too much of the technical details because that is not the skill that they needed. They brought us in, my team, to solve the technical skill, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was all personalities. So I'm not joking. The first meeting I went into to solve this problem, they were all around the table. The project manager came in and what the F is going on in here? I'm not joking. And it was the only time in my career I've nearly stood up and left. So I was like, this is nonsense. I'm not having this. And it, like, there was minor technical issues with the way the air handling unit was turning on and blah, blah, we could fix that. But man, everybody hated each other. Everybody just sat there and just was fighting and all this sort of stuff every morning. And so very quickly, I realized that if I give them a technical solution, they're just going to fight back at me. So instead, the role ended up being just putting an arm around everybody and saying, it's all right, guys, we'll fix this. Don't worry about it. And I was like the team psychologist, I think. And then about we like they all knew how to find the answer. They just hated each other. So it was very much a psychology. Couch is open. Come and tell me your problems, and we'll bitch about everybody else, and then it'll be fine. And we solved it. I mean, it was an insane project, but we got it over the line, and we got it over the line happily in the end. So I used to tell the team that their one goal every day. We had to go to site every morning at 9 o'clock for this meeting. Their one goal every day was to make somebody smile in that meeting. That was my only instruction to them. And it worked, and it's a great building, and I still love going back to it. So that taught me that we need empathy, and we have empathy, and you just allow yourself to bring that out. And another trait I think we have is our curiosity. The best engineers I know are the ones that keep asking questions. They ask more questions than they provide answers to. And why is the brief the way it is? Why is this building being built, or why is it being refurbished? Only when you ask those questions, actually, can you provide the better solutions to the better engineering solutions. And the curiosity, if you do keep asking those questions, can lead you down to some like really weird and wonderful paths. And you'll meet people from all walks of life, from all ends of the spectrum as well. Recently, I met a climate change denier, which was insane because I was there to help them on their decarbonisation journey. And so I was selling them, so this is what we're going to do to decarbonise this building. They're like, well, none of it's true anyway, is it? But, wrong audience. I've also met a famous singer. I'm going to do a quiz now. Anybody know who that might refer to? Ian, you surely know.
Oh, the Irish guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did his house.
Did you?
Yes. Back in the day.
I can't remember his name.
Christopher.
Christopher.
Anyone know Christopher? You're all too young.
They're all too
God. Some beautiful projects. I did a project with post-16 SEN kids, so severe cognitive disabilities, and understanding how they use the space. Running water is a big trigger for them. You can't like that. This, we get to work with and help people that really need your help as well, which is fantastic and very rewarding. And then the next week you might be working on a brand new golf club. And then the week after that you might be working on an NHS hospital that doesn't even have enough money to fix a leak that's leaking over a surgical bed. And I think also at one stage I have worked on what I'm sure, but nobody ever confirmed, was a Russian oligarch's house. I'm not going to show you any pictures of that because I'm definitely not allowed. But I had a one-way mirror in the basement. I don't know why. Also, you meet weird, kind of spot the celebrity. And you see Mr. Bean. Do you know who Mr. Bean is, right? Yeah. Forgot that one. Also, I'm heavily pregnant there, but that's not wine, it's allergens. Just to clarify. And that's the Queen before she was the Queen. And this inbuilt curiosity then leads to ask all these questions, and these sort of non-engineering questions. How do these companies work? How does the money flow? You're selling your services, you're getting paid. they're not going to, unless you understand their business, you're not going to be able to get yourself an appointment. And so by helping them, you start asking questions, well, what are they really interested in? You know, as engineers, we talk about energy consumption, we talk about carbon. It's rarely those things that clients are interested in. It might be the question they ask you, but it isn't always their definition of what a successful building is. It's often much bigger and actually sometimes much, much smaller than that. A good building performance will mean different things to every single person we work with. These are some of the metrics that we've come across in our time with various clients. Yes, energy, carbon emissions are there, energy consumption is there. Maintenance costs is quite a big one. Sick days, you know, we've got an office building. Actually, they measure their success in that building in that business on sick days. Are we producing an environment that's going to make that get better or worse? And one of them in hotels is always complaints. That's it. That's how they measure whether it's success or not. How many complaints they get. So understanding that, don't talk to your clients in energy levels. Talk to them in complaint levels. Understanding this and the drivers of your clients and people is what differentiates a good engineer from a bad one. And it also differentiates, I would argue, a good human from a bad one as well. And imagine that there's not very many other careers where you get exposure to all of that, to all those drivers, to all of those different characteristics. You get such visibility across industries. I don't know if you get anywhere else. And that's another characteristic of this career. I think it's a really important reason why we're going to run the world. And about 15 years ago, I began to move away from the construction side. So I moved, you mentioned, into building performance. I have a natural interest in people, in architecture, less of an interest in builders. And so it kind of made that decision inevitable. But there was a bit of a trigger to kicking all that off. And it was to do with this building, which is the actual building I was working on, was this one in the background, Somerville College. Wonderful architect called Ian Durbin. Still one of my favourites. Very much even from an architect, but they all are. But he's a great architect. And we had designed a solar thermal panel for the hot water in that building. And only because our office was quite close by and I was invested in it, I did keep going back to it and just having a go and plant room, having a look around, see what was happening. And what I discovered was that the thermal panels weren't doing very much at all. And you know, a deep dive, I wasn't getting paid for at the time, but a deep dive into it because it was bugging me. And it turned out that the Legionella cycle was kicking in too often and it was heating it up too much that the solar thermal was never needed. And so it was just dumping heat all the time and actually using electricity to heat the water, which was insane. And this is a little graphic that I used, and I know this isn't very sexy. But each of those lines is when the gas was triggered to fire that, to heat that hot water, each of those lines. And you can see as we moved on, that's throughout the day, I think you should chunk of the day. As we moved on and made our optimization, you could see those lines coming less and less and less until they were hardly firing at all. And for me, that was a huge moment where I went, oh, I can make an actual difference. I can tell somebody to press a button to stop using gas. And that for me was huge. That was a real moment where I was like, this is like a live thing I can check. Because I very much believe in the carbon emergency, that we're in the climate emergency, that we have to make a change. We have to stop this carbon being emitted now. And I can do that. And that was really cool for me. And just realizing that just because I designed something a certain way doesn't mean it's not necessarily working that way, and I can be the one to make it work better. And so I developed a team. This is a picture of me, my lovely first team. And in setting up this team in Hoare Lea, meant that I was setting up effectively a little mini business. In order to get this gang approved, I had to do a business plan, I had to sell it to the other partners. I think you were in that meeting where we were selling it all. I needed to understand where the money was going to come from, what the market was like, why my clients would buy it, what the profit and loss was going to be, all other aspects of running any other business. And so there's another tick to our box. We have to understand what business is like and how business works. So the final characteristic of engineers in this career, I'm going to end on, and it's a less of a positive one than the others. And it's one thing I think that we have to change about ourselves and have to change in the industry. And I think it's probably the one thing that's stopping us from running the world, actually. And it's our lack of confidence. And I mentioned this before. I've met some of the smartest people in the world. from what I can tell anyway, over the years, some of them just guys on building sites who just have just knowledge that will blow you away. And they've got compassion, they've got humility, and they've got curiosity. And they've got morals, they can learn from their mistakes. And yet because there's that belief that somewhere out there, there's somebody that's smarter than them, they kind of keep it hidden. You actually said it earlier. You said something about, you put yourself down about saying something, oh, I'm not smart enough for that, earlier on in the introduction to this talk. Even Ian is doing it after all that. So there's one thing, one request to all of you is to give yourself that confidence and belief. Be proud of your abilities, believe in your solutions, because they will be different from other people's solutions. That doesn't mean they're wrong. And sell them confidently and sell them loudly. And who knows, hopefully in 20 years' time, one of you, all of you will be running the world. Thank you.
Right, does anybody have any questions at all? Wants to go first?
Okay, my question is, have you ever designed a passive house with a passive building or?
A passive, no,
No.
not a passive house certified. So I've
Not
worked on
yet.
buildings that have passive house characteristics, but the certification process is too difficult for a lot of them, so it makes it not viable.
But don't you think that the passive house measures could be like a solution for going to really low carbon buildings?
Yeah, I mean, passive house has been proven to work. It definitely works. But remember, we have to understand the business case. The business case doesn't stack up.
Is it costly or just
Yeah.
the admin?
Both,
Yeah.
both. Yeah, I think it's getting better. I think it will get better. Your thoughts on the same, but
I would agree.
it can be a frustration in the career because you think you've got the perfect engineering solution and yet nobody's doing it. Soft landings is another example. Great idea. It makes loads of sense, and yet we're not doing it.
I mean, I would agree with all of that. And also, you just look at some of the buildings that Ina has been working on over her career. Passive house is fine for some, it's not suitable for others. So it's a partial solution at best. But again, it's one of those things that really, I don't know, can't quite put my finger on why. I think our industry is very slow at doing the right thing. I can't quite say it correctly, but it seems to me that passive house is one of those things that seems to have some potential, and everybody thinks it's the solution, but it actually is a solution for a relatively small, 50% of the buildings. And even then, when it's the right sort of system for a building, it's going to cost you 20 or 30% more. It's going to limit the architectural style. It's going to, it's not all positives. I'm certainly not negative to passive house, but it's just our industry isn't a one solution show, as it were.
But I'm talking about the principles.
Yeah.
The principles are fine. I mean, how can they not be right? Good insulation, good air tightness.
There's nothing to stop you, suggesting parts of it.
Yes.
Bits that you can, like triple glazing, say.
I think now they've got, instead of
Do that.
they call it low carbon buildings.
Yeah, okay.
That's in parallel, so you don't need to do 100% passive house.
Yeah, yeah.
We can do just low carbon certified.
You hope it's one of those things that ends up not being needed at all.
Yes, exactly.
They're all just passive.
Yeah.
Not a
Yeah.
pain.
Actually, going back to examples of buildings you mentioned, one of my first major projects was an office building in Harrogate up in Yorkshire. It was freezing cold, and it was quite a nice traditional architectural style, 3-story building. But for some reason, the heating system wouldn't work. So it sort of became a bit of a joke. People came in on a Monday morning, and it took until Wednesday to heat the building. I couldn't work out why it was. And for about a year of sleepless nights, I'm driving up and down to Harrogate from Bristol, which was a trek in itself. And then we decided to do an air pressure test on the building. This is when the BRE was sort of launching, the Building Research Establishment, launching this concept. And some guys came up from Reading or wherever it was they were to do the test. And I remember they sort of let off this smoke bomb inside the building, and then literally the smoke was coming out of the windows and everything. and it was the worst building they'd ever tested in terms of air. Wow. So the boilers were working flat out. They were heating all the building up, and then all the air was going through. And that's an example of, you know, I don't think when the architect who designed it wasn't stupid. He just missed something. The builders who built it weren't wrong. They didn't build it incorrectly. They just missed something. It just goes to show that this industry is it's a funny little industry really, because, you know, nobody's necessarily done anything wrong, but the end result is disastrous. And you go back to you know, it's about understanding your client. You know, the client's just paid £7 million, wherever it was, and he couldn't get the building warm. But it was one of those life skills that I've definitely learned. So air tightness, you know, it doesn't take passive house to stop that being horrible, that particular buildings. Anyway, rapidly, if I had any other questions?
You said you set up a whole business plan for the performance department, right? So I'm actually very fascinated about that. So can I ask you about more of your target market? Because you're looking for existing buildings, but I was wondering more if you look into buildings that were built to be in a sustainable way, but they're performing below benchmark, or you're going to other buildings that might not have any kind of sustainability buildings in the project, and then you're coming in to be okay. We can do a full diagnostics on your performance, and then we can optimize something to get you some look at your energy, your utilities, and I was just wondering how your approach.
I'm interested in your answer.
No, it is. It's a really good question. Yeah. It's good. It's good that you're interested in the business side of it as well. I think that's really important. It's not a skill that's generally taught too much. So, well, there's a sweet spot of buildings that really are the best fun for me to optimize, and that I can get the most out of it. And actually, they're not the old buildings. Well, if you go back into an older building, they've got like maybe a boiler and a chiller and some radiators, kind of it. The newer stuff, and I say maybe from, I don't know, mid-90s onwards, that's when we started adding stuff to buildings, fun stuff. You know, BMSs, fine coil units, displacement vent, all these weird and wonderful ideas and alternative solution, ground source heat pumps, all this stuff. Those are the ones that actually go wrong. Those are the ones that need our expertise to work more efficiently. So you start with that, people who have that sort of building portfolio. Generally, owner-occupiers as well. Or owner retainers. So a lot of companies will build a building and then sell it on. It's not for them. They're not interested. That's not who you target. You don't target those. So it was understanding those sorts of drivers. People had a long-term vested interest in the performance of their buildings. I learned early on, we thought the sell would be the energy saving. We thought, oh, you're going to save £50,000 in your electricity bill this year. You know, just give us some of that and it'd be great. Like, not interested. And the reason being that is those metrics, that's not a metric for them. In university buildings, the metric was, we've got a new professor coming in. He needs to be happy. He's our metric. If he's grumpy, we're in massive trouble. So that for them, that was the metric. I was having a discussion with the bank, and I'm saying, I can save you £50,000 a year. And they're like, you made 50 billion profit. Like, what the hell do you care? You know, so that wasn't the sell. And a few different companies were trying at the time to make that the sell. The sell has to be what's important to that investor. So if it could be a private investor that has a portfolio, and that maybe carbon is there. At the moment, there's a few out there where they report on carbon and they're desperate to get it down. That's good. That's easy to solve. But on others, it is just, if it's a hotel, we just don't want people complaining. You know, so it's kind of a bit of all of those things together, and that's how you decide on what the market is and what it's worth to them to pay you.
Okay, so it'll depend on the kind of building also, right?
Yeah.
And just touching on the sales part of it. Of course, there are the big pillars of optimization, the energy and carbon. But we're from like half of us here are from the health and well-being masters. And I was wondering, you actually showed some of our metrics as well. I was wondering if you have ongoing projects where it's just focused on health and well-being in buildings, or it's more of like an add-on on a project that you end up doing.
It's always, So I think the difficulty with health and well-being is that, well, I guess they're two different things, aren't they? So the things like the health, the minimum standard is covered. So that building has to meet those minimum standards, say for fresh air or CO2 levels in a room. We have to meet those anyway. The industry hasn't quite grasped the benefit in going above and beyond that.
Not just compliance.
Not just compliance, a bit more. And we've only just figured that out in carbon, that it's beneficial to go above and beyond it, but still it's a bit more about compliance. And health and well-being is still there, is still, I think, behind that even further. And we did quite a lot of work at one stage about the benefits of going above and beyond compliance in health and well-being. And it was almost like it was gaining quite a bit of traction, and then COVID hit, which actually was kind of good in a way, because it did focus the mind on, oh, fresh air is really important. You know, people hadn't really appreciated that. And I was asked to go into some buildings during COVID to check their ventilation rates, to make sure when we open, how many people can we have in here? They weren't complying with minimum standards, most of them. So the bar was that low that actually we exposed a lot of buildings that weren't complying, that maybe just had this guy in them and no fresh air. You know, they're like, oh, that's our ventilation. I'm like, well, there's no fresh air in that one. You know, that's not fresh air, that's just cooling. And that was quite an eye opener as well, because you're trying to sell something that's above compliance. They're not even complying. And so it kind of makes you, it's a bit more grounding. Our buildings aren't in a great state. You know, they're not in a good position to try and make them better than standard. They just need to get to standard first, and then we can start making them better. Does that answer your question? It's, yeah.
And what about certification? I'm thinking of lead operations and maintenance. I'm thinking about, in our case, we have our well.
Yeah,
We also
yeah.
work with certification.
I did well. That New Street Square building was well.
Oh,
Was
okay.
well done. That was well certified. I don't know which level. And I suppose I really liked well as an engineer, from an engineer standpoint. I really liked it because it drills right into it. Like you get right into the weeds.
But you have to.
Yeah. From a client standpoint, I don't think they said they'll never do it again. It's too expensive. Yeah, it's too expensive. They didn't get anything from it.
That's Deloitte.
I mean, they might change their mind, but the guys I spoke to, they're like, that wasn't worth it. It was expensive.
It doesn't boost any kind of lease.
Not enough. Not enough. And what it did for them, it didn't really change that much in their heads. So yeah, I don't know. Like that's again understanding the client. Why are they doing it? Is it just the badge? Well, what's that badge worth to them? Understanding how they value that building. Can you add on that badge? The big business issue we're having at the moment in the industry is decarbonisation. So we've written over the last 5 years, I spent all my time writing decarbonisation plans for existing buildings. So this building, we've got planned pathway. This is how you get it to net zero carbon. Brilliant. And now we're at this massive impasse where nobody can figure out how to pay for it. So there's grants for public sector buildings. You have to apply for them. Some people win them, some people don't. Even then, when they do win them, they have to be finished. They have like 6 months to finish them. There's really stupid system. Private sector, there doesn't seem to be any benefit, and the building valuators are not able yet to put a number on the increase in value of a building that has been decarbonised. And so to release funds to pay for it, because it isn't cheap, it's expensive, is very difficult. And that's that's not engineering. And yes, I'm having those discussions all the time about, well, how do I help them go to their investors to say, yes, we need £1.5 million to put in a heat pump in this building. How do we get that money? Because that's really what I want to do. You know, that's what we all want to do, is we want to make those buildings better, but we have to help them get that money in order to do it. So it's a big debate at the moment. Yeah.
It's probably I retired 4 or 5 years ago, and before I retired, it was well.
Yeah.
Now it's decarbonisation. I think that's what seems to be the driver.
Yeah.
In terms of what clients worry about. I'm doing some work with the University of Oxford, and the guy who I know there, who's fairly senior in the university, he said that one thing that keeps him up at night is how he's going to decarbonise his estate. And this is a guy that's dealing with student protests, death threats, all these sort of things. That's his biggest worry, which surprised me actually.
And the difficulty with the solution won't be the engineering difficulty of it.
Not at all.
It's not
The
about
engineering is the easy bit.
Yeah,
It's how you do all the other bits.
exactly. Yeah, it's how do you
Yeah.
manage it, and it's a massive project, and they just don't have it. They all said they're going to do it. All of our clients, universities, all said we're going to be net zero carbon by 2030, by 2040, and then we showed them how, and they all went, "Oh, going to cost me what?"
Yeah.
And that's the kind of current, which is quite exciting. It's really exciting to be part of it because
Yeah.
you know, they want to do it. And there is money. There's definitely money somewhere. It's how we unlock that money to be able to flow through to get the stuff done.
But the other thing I like about decarbonising buildings is it's a truly multidisciplinary thing. It's not just engineering.
No.
It's everything. It's the architecture, it's the facade, it's the users, it's the psychology, it's the client, it's everything, all in that mix. And I mean, it's a huge potential.
Yeah.
Huge challenge, huge potential. But, is there about somebody told me there was about 22 million existing buildings in the UK that need to be decarbonised by 2050.
Oh, I don't know. I hadn't heard that statistic.
Yeah.
The one I use is that 80% of buildings that will exist in 2050 are already built.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's the stuff that we work on for 26. Yeah, that's UK GBC quote, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So which is astounding. Then thinking, oh, well, why are we spending the money on the new stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
Spend it on the existing stuff.
Well, yeah. Our industry, the industry we're in, spends 99% of its time on new buildings.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Sorry, no.
My question. I participated in NX 84, which is for district heating, and as part of, I don't know if you're aware, for these projects by international energy agencies.
Yes.
That's big projects for 5 years.
Work with Roger Hitchin on
Yeah.
heat pump ones.
And what I've noticed is the philosophy of decarbonization in Europe is entirely different
Yes.
what we have here in
Yes,
UK.
it is, yeah. No, just-
More towards like stop decarbonization, but that are looking at individual buildings. More towards like using fourth and fifth generation of district heating system.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever worked on fourth or fifth generation. What do you think the challenges are? Do you think they are powerful tools?
Yeah, they've got any experience in that. No, I think the reason in why, well, this is what I've been told and what I understand about why we're looking at building levels in this country, is that even if we do all of the grid stuff, even if we put PVs on all of the buildings, because of the way the population density here, we will still need to reduce energy consumption by 60%. And so you can't do that on a global scale. Reducing energy consumption is the end user bit. And I think that's why this country suffers more from that than other countries. And that's probably why there's more of a focus on the building requirement.
But they say that utilizing the diversity factor reduce the ultimate load up to 70%. So we can get rid of 30% just by diversifying our loads if we look at scale levels. That's why encouraging to develop these sort of fourth and fifth generation of district heating systems.
Okay.
I'm
not familiar with that.
It always seems to me that the in the UK as well, the capital cost and the complexity and the planning and the build cost of a district heating system it just seems frightening. It just seems too much to me.
The initial cost would be quite high, but the running costs.
Obviously, yeah, but it's and it's the timescale as well. You know, somebody was talking about putting a district heating system in Oxford, and I'm thinking the complexity of digging up central Oxford to put in it takes so long. I don't think we've got the time. Anyway.
I think also that I've been asked many times to come into buildings that are connected to district heating systems and optimize them, because it's very hard to get them right. And whatever way, I don't know if they do it different on the continent, but the way the contracts are set up here, you have a maximum flow rate you're allowed to return into the system for, and they're never met. They're impossible to reach because things are oversized for whatever, blah, blah, loads of different reasons. But they've put a lot of people off district heating.
That's why they use a combined approach in fourth and fifth generation of district.
In the continent. Yeah.
So
I think that bridge may have been burned here. I'm not sure. People are not keen. Clients are not keen. But they're forcing them though soon. I think there's a new policy out about zoning, zones of zone of interest, whatever. Yeah. So they might be forced to do it soon, which is going to be interesting. Going to be a tough battle.
I have a question. I have a slight fear that we're going to, in the sort of legally binding dash to zero carbon or net zero carbon, that if we're not careful, we're going to put a sticking plaster over all the faults that are in the building and make it net zero carbon, basically.
Yeah.
So that suddenly we're going to wake up in 2051 with all the buildings being net zero carbon, but none of them being very nice to be in. So have you got any thoughts on that? How do we avoid that?
I think so my nervousness about that sort of question is that's why it's taking so long. Is those questions.
So it's my
Mother, sort of. It's like, what is it? Paralysis by analysis?
yeah, maybe.
And also don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
If we are in that situation, brilliant, nailed it.
Yeah.
You know, and
Well, I'm not sure though, are we?
yeah, but then we'll move on to that. Well, fix it then.
Yeah.
Fix that
Okay.
problem.
Okay.
Some of the most, like one of my favorite buildings to be in ever on any time of year is there's an abbey, like an ancient abbey, like the year 500 or something in my local town. That building is hot in the winter, it's cold in the summer, and it uses nothing. You know, and those are the buildings that will always be there.
Yeah.
And those are buildings that we can as humans build.
Yeah.
So we can do it.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely competence.
Any other questions?
I was curious as well, because I think the big chunk of operational carbon emissions in buildings are the residential, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Say that bit again. The big chunk
Carbon emissions.
Of operational carbon. It comes from the residential, because in the UK you have really old houses.
Yeah, I think that, well, going back to my statistic, the 20 million, probably about 18 million of those are houses, probably more than that.
Oh, so it's the residential side of it.
Yeah.
And then you showed us a few of your cases, but all the residential cases you show are like super rich people.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you actually work with maybe housing association.
So we've done a few,
That's a
yeah.
really good
Actually, should put up Bryn Braggle. Yeah, really difficult because so as a consultant, we charge fees for our time. Homes, especially kind of council homes, don't have extra money to pay fancy consultant fees. So actually, not often. We don't get involved in that often. But there have been a few cases where we have, and there's two recently, both in Wales. So the Welsh government have something called the Innovative Housing Programme, IHP. It's worth a look. And they're trying to develop social housing that is really energy efficient and low carbon use and affordable. So it isn't that much more expensive to build. And there's one that we did in South Wales called Bryn Braggle. And they were built and we developed them and they perform amazingly well. They did need post-completion tweaks, you know, and for some of the users to help with. One of the users had a child with physical disabilities and they had one of those plunge tanks, like those warm pools, just in their kitchen. Yeah. And of course, our calculations never figured that one out. That was going to be there. So they were a huge, massive hot water load. So there's things like that we had to go back in and, you know, kind of tweak and make sure. And they've been brilliant. So I'm excited to see what happens with those next. And at the same time, the Welsh government use some of those learnings. And then I've got a group of people together to come up with standards to say, right, any social housing, any council housing has to have this minimum set of standards, which is low energy, you know, really high U values or low U values, really high insulation, all those sorts of things, MVHR. So I would look to the Welsh government, from my experience anyway, that seem to be doing quite a lot of good work there and working with some good architects in Swansea, I think, University. So not a huge amount, but there is something. Less in England. They're still putting in rubbish all over the place.
They are. Lots and lots of them.
I mean, there's gas boilers being installed today now.
I know. This very moment. Worse, well, even worse than that, it's probably a gas boiler that can take hydrogen. It's just ready, which you'll never use. Yeah, ridiculous. Any other questions? If not, then one question.
So maybe for the students here. So in terms of somebody starting a career or they are trained themselves, what type of skills or like there's lots of fascination for people to get these lead sort of stuff like accreditation and stuff, give those exams, etc.
Okay.
Are they beneficial as stepping stones when people apply for graduate jobs and things like that? Once they move out of these, like from the academic side into the industry, how much weight like?
I can only speak for Hoare Lea.
Yeah.
And I don't, they probably don't hold a huge amount of weight. They're very useful skills, but actually we tend to, if we need them, we put people on the courses ourselves. I think they're really good to have an understanding of them. It's really, I think, put you up a notch. Getting the certificate, I don't know, maybe, I mean, I can only speak for us. I don't tend to be bothered too much about that.
So what are you looking for example?
Curiosity, all those things I set up on the board,
Just
that's it. Yeah,
That's,
that's it.
somebody asked a question last time.
Don't care what the course is.
In fact, I can't remember the guy I was talking to, but he was on the some master's course. And he was saying, oh, I come to this master's course. I used to be an installer of MEP equipment. He said, I can't see how I'm ever going to join a consultant engineer with that background. And I said, absolutely, definitely not. In fact, I would say that if I was still at Hoare Lea, that's the sort of person I would take, because what you want to do is just capture as many of those in any communication you have with a prospective employer. Sorry, because I couldn't press the right button, but absolutely, definitely. So don't hide behind lead things. I mean, lead things are all very nice to have, but actually, as an employer, those are the things that we want to see. And you can do that in any way, in your written style, in your interview technique, or in your CV, or in the projects that you show as reference cases. I mean, those are the things that are important, I think. And I know that sounds really glib saying that on my side of the table, and you've got to go through all of that. But honestly, those are the things that need to come out.
A follow-up, I think it's very much his question, but these, I see them as soft skills. We can work on them in terms of how we approach the selection process, right? How we can bring it out of ourselves to show you. But I think his question was a bit more on what about the hard skills? Like until we graduate, maybe what can we actually work? Which tools can we look into to actually become as developed as we could be?
I suppose to take why it is still a soft skill is that I don't do it for the reason for getting a job. And I know that sounds really, that might sound, oh, well, you're in a position of power, but that's what we want to see is an interest in buildings, like it's an interest in the built environment. So go and study buildings, go and find your favorite building and understand it, and then talk about it. That's the bit that is really appealing to me as an employer. When I have, like some of the graduates we've taken on, they haven't necessarily had the right qualifications, but they have that interest. So if you have an interest in the field and you read up, like you read the articles, you know what's happening in the industry, that's interesting, that's valuable. What would you change in policy and governmental policy? Because there's a huge gap in decarbonisation in policy. There's nothing there really to force people to do it. And so what would you change? You know, come up with those things, understand the landscape, I think. Don't necessarily get the BREEAM, whatever,
That's super expensive.
yeah, save your money. Read a few articles.
Don't do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I remember I've got another question to ask you. Actually, I think I asked one of these lecture series 2 or 3 times ago about how much interaction you have with industry in your course, and if there was any of it. Do you get many people from industry coming along and chatting, or?
I can say the biggest quality of networking that we did, we had an integrated building design for health and well-being. And that one, we had people from the industry being our tutors.
Right.
So we actually had, in my case, I had someone from CBRE, which was coincidentally from my old company. So it was fascinating for me to just be, and then we could just talk to them. Okay, this is an academic report. It needs to be, how would it be in a business? Would this be approved? What are your objectives? What are you looking for? So that was very rich. But apart from that, it's mostly like sparse events, kind of like this, but it's not very widespread. You know?
Yeah. So more of this would be not necessarily more of this, but more engagement with industry would be welcome.
Yeah, I mean, it's an objective thing, right?
Yeah.
Because I've had this conversation with our teachers. It's sometimes we'll talk about, okay, but we need to know what the industry wants, right?
Exactly,
So
yeah.
a lot of times it means that we have to talk about certification, something like that. And they try to avoid it so they can further the academic side. So there's a little conflict there as well.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
But but that's my opinion. That's really my experience. Yeah, of course, for me, having interactions like this is very rich, you know, and it can change people's lives.
Any other thoughts? Go on.
I think, yeah, and also for taking, I think the compulsory models, at least for our program, the health sustainable livings, to particularly provide a lot of opportunities for industry, but one of the modules that it's learning from for inclusive places. The lecturer is consultant.
Right.
Full time is really like spends only 2 days at CL, and she brings up people from the industry. But I think that really get that kind of interest, right? Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting feedback.
Would you be aware of the different types of roles you can have once you're graduated? Like is that done to like kind of go through the different types of. This is one perspective, right? This is
This is
one bit.
perspective.
There's
Yeah.
loads of other roles and jobs, careers.
There are some fairs
Yeah.
that they'll cover it.
Careers
more
fair.
general stuff.
Yeah.
But then you're actually talking to the people because they'll come by
Yeah.
and you can have a session talking to them. So I think that's the most that we would talk. Apart from that, it just helps in my thing. You do the well AP, and then you can get a big sense of what you can actually do.
Yeah.
Projects look like.
Okay. Right, I think we're done. Thanks very much for attending, and thank you, Eimear, for all the effort you put into putting that together. And if you could just thank Eimear in the usual way. Thank you very much.